I'm Ann Rieselbach, the League's Program Director, and I'd like to welcome you to the second night of lectures by winners of the 2021 Architectural League Prize for Young Architects and Designers. On behalf of the League, I would like again to thank the League Prize Committee, comprised of past competition winners, Evie Diamantopoulou, Cyrus Penarroyo, and Alison Van Glino, who conceived the timely and probing competition theme, housekeeping, and for their selection of jury members, Tatiana Bilbao, Peggy Deemer, Fritz Haig, and Victor Jones, who joined the committee to select this year's winners. Their combined expertise made for a memorable discussion during what was the first, but will not be the last, online League Prize jury. 2021 marks the 40th year of the League Prize program, which is formerly known as the Young Architects Forum. The annual reappraisal and renewal provided by each successive committee and the jurors they recruit keeps the program's clear focus on contemporary concerns within and beyond the profession. This is the second pair of lectures by the 6 winners. We hope that you can join us again next Tuesday for the final set of presentations. Please, if you have not already, visit the truly dynamic online exhibition of all the winners' work, including process videos, local installations, collages, drawings, and models, the majority newly created on the League's website. And this joins already published profiles of the winner. Early next month, all of the lecture videos will also be accessible online, joined by a set of interviews with the winners. All of the online material was created with the support of League staff members Sarah Wessler, Ann Carlisle, Nana Sirikoa, with the guidance of the League's program manager, Katerina Flaxman, who worked with the committee all the way through the program. Britt Cobb and Michael Beirut at Pentagram once again designed compelling competition graphics and adapted the design for the now downloadable installation poster, which is a way of tangibly getting the word out online and partially locally on-site installations. A network of past League Prize winners from across North America is helping to literally put the word and images out on the walls and online. So please download a poster, print it out, and post it someplace where people can see it. And there's a QR code that will take people directly to the installation. All of this is made possible through the enthusiastic corporate sponsorship provided by Tischler & Son, Judlow, and Luminaire. Support is also provided by the Next Generation Fund, which is an alumni fund of the Architectural League's Emerging Voices and League Prize programs, and the J. Clausen Mills Fund of the Architectural League. League programs are also made possible in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Governor Andrew M. Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. And of course, through the enthusiasm and support of the League's members and friends. Although our annual program year is drawing to a close, there are still a number of upcoming events. Please check the League's website and sign up for our weekly newsletter to learn more about these events and the League in general, including an extensive collection of online resources, such as videos and essays documenting past programs, exhibitions, and special projects. Cyrus will introduce tonight's speakers, and after their presentations, he will join them in conversation and relay questions from the audience. So please post them in the Q&A section, not the chat section. And I turn it over now to Cyrus. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of lectures in the 2021 Architectural League Prize winners, by the 2021 Architectural League Prize winners. Tonight, we will hear from Tei Carpenter of Agency, and Rodrigo Escandón Cesarman, and Ricardo Matias of APRDELESP. My name is Cyrus Penarroyo, and I have the privilege of serving in this year's Young Architects and Designers Committee, alongside Evie Diamantopoulou and Alison Van Glino. As a committee, we were asked to develop a theme for this year's portfolio competition. We felt that the theme should encourage applicants to evaluate and format their work in relation to the messiness of our contemporary milieu. And we saw this as an opportunity to recognize practices that are thinking critically about the built environment and how it can support different models for coexistence. The three of us decided on the term housekeeping. In the past year, we as a society became acutely aware of the physical limits of our own dwellings, as our homes transformed into remote offices, classrooms, and everything in between. And we as a committee felt that the word housekeeping would prompt applicants to take a closer look at our disciplinary home and reflect upon its various socio-political entanglements. Of the many questions that we posed in the call for submissions, one in particular stands out. What is it about the way designers work that we're so desperate to maintain, preserve, and protect? Moreover, What aspects of the profession could we dispose of entirely in service of justice, joy, and our collective well-being? In developing the theme, we considered many interpretations of housekeeping beyond its familiar associations with cleanliness. For instance, in English, the word ecology comes from oikos, the ancient Greek word for house, and the word economy comes from oikonomia, which in Greek translates to household management, and housekeeping by extension. Together, the words ecology and economy imply an awareness of relationships and resources that seems especially urgent today, as phrases like social unrest and environmental collapse are used with more frequency to describe the state of our world. We are interested in how this emerging generation of architects is sensitive to the actors, objects, and systems that constitute our surroundings. When we reviewed the submissions, together with jury members Tatiana Bilbao, Peggy Deemer, Fritz Haig, and Victor Jones, the portfolios for Agency, and APRDELESP stood out to us. Both practices engage their immediate contexts in profound and refreshing ways. Both have a grasp of material cultures and handle them with care. And both value architecture's ability to enrich social interactions. For these reasons, we thought Agency, and APRDELESP were deserving of the prize. I'm delighted to now introduce Tei Carpenter, Rodrigo Escandón Cesarman, and Ricardo Roxo Matias. Tei Carpenter is the founder of the New York-based Agency, an assistant professor at University of Toronto, and an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Brown University and an MArch from Princeton University. In her submission for the prize, Tei interpreted the word housekeeping in 3 distinct ways, with each interpretation allowing her to focus on multiple scales of spatial and material transformation. At the building scale, and I'm paraphrasing here, she considered how the coronavirus pandemic has altered behavioral patterns in ways that could forever change how we design and occupy domestic space. At the urban scale, she playfully reimagined familiar streetscape elements to propose vibrant spaces for civic engagement. And at the geological scale, she developed alternative approaches and attitudes toward waste. Tei's portfolio, in her own words, aimed to identify deeper systemic protocols at play to shift not just what we do, but simultaneously how we do it, in order for architecture to have a positive societal impact. As a jury, we admired Tei's ability to bring coherence to complex urban systems. We also appreciated her regard for architecture's multiple temporalities, as seen in her spatial clocks, of which I'm a personal fan, her attention to material life cycles, and her resistance to the new in her recurrent use of words beginning with the prefix re, like repurpose, respecify, and remix, which to me signals a valuing of history, a resource-conscious optimism, and a belief that designers are perpetually responsible for the stuff we bring into the world. Rodrigo Escandón Cesarman and Ricardo Roxo Matias are founding partners of the Mexico City-based studio APRDELESP, along with non-entering partner Guillermo González Ceballos. Rodrigo received his B.Arch from Universidad Iberoamericana, his MA in economics from Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, and his MS in architecture studies from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Ricardo received his B.Arch and M.Arch from Universidade de Lisboa. In their submission for the prize, Rodrigo and Ricardo described their radical approach to practice. To quote the partners, they believe architecture firms are in a critical position to use their own offices and infrastructures as public sites of spatial research and experimentation, even if it requires a bit more housekeeping. Instead of a singular private interior, APRDELESP sees their office as a distributed public interface, what they call a network of self-managed subspaces shared with members of their community. These subspaces are a way for them to nurture relationships by momentarily stitching themselves into Mexico City's urban fabric, a version of working remotely that's been integral to their practice since it was founded in 2012. For Rodrigo and Ricardo, housekeeping refers to the social and spatial protocols required to keep friendships and facilities intact. As a jury, we recognized APRDELESP's unique ability to model forms of collectivity in both their work and their way of working. In particular, we appreciated how their urbanistically embedded practice embraced the messiness of iterative methods, hybridized programs, chance encounters, public debates, and the overlaps between physical and digital spaces. We thought their portfolio, a series of gatherings of objects and people across commercial and institutional spaces, was impressive and inspiring. It stood out for avoiding the pitfalls of other promotional documents and instead appeared to be a natural extension of the material and immaterial networks they've cultivated. And with that, please join me in welcoming and congratulating Tei Carpenter, Rodrigo Escandón Cesarman, and Ricardo, Roxo, Matias. Following their talks, the four of us will have a conversation and you'll have the chance to ask them questions.
Thank you, Cyrus, for the introduction. And thank you to the Architectural League of New York for the honor and for advocating and providing a platform for young architects over the years. Congratulations to the other winners of this year's League Prize. It's a really incredible company to be in, and I'm grateful to be learning so much from each of your practices. Thank you to all of you out there for joining the lecture this evening, and a special thank you to my family, friends, and mentors for the support over the years, and to my studio team, Ian Chung, Aaron Zhang, and Eric Jinmatsu Robertson. My work centers around the transformative potentials of architecture and the design of buildings, infrastructure, systems, and materials. It ranges from the intimate scale of the individual to the collective scale of infrastructural community amenities, engaging critical issues of reuse, waste, and the public value of design. The work is consistently set within the frictions of reality with the goal of bringing it into an experiential built dimension. For me, the prompt of housekeeping for this year's Architectural League Prize evokes a daily ritual of upkeep and maintenance, of making one's house feel new again. But what if there are cracks in the foundation of that house? This evening, I'll present 9 projects in 3 parts that aim to identify deeper systemic protocols at play to shift not just what we as architects do, but simultaneously how we do it, in order for architecture to have a positive societal impact. The projects aim to redefine architectural concerns and expand an understanding of what constitutes the house that we're trying to maintain. In the first part, Housekeeping as Domestic Intensity, I'll discuss the Crown House and the Balcony Retrofits projects, which emerged directly from the COVID-19 pandemic, and understand housekeeping as being kept in-house. These projects take on domestic elements to reevaluate the house itself and how one spends time within it. The work reevaluates the relationship between the spatial and temporal and domestic sphere, retrofits existing conditions, and offers a series of designs that bring the inside outside. While the rooms, walls, and foundations of a house must be well kept and maintained, it's the infrastructures of the home that enable habitability, such as the water, electricity, or the internet systems of the home. While infrastructure is typically considered to be outside the purview of architecture, it's intrinsically tied to the design of buildings and cities. In the second part, Housekeeping as Infrastructural Engagement, I'll share Open Barriers and New Public Hydrant, projects that focus on urban interventions into everyday infrastructural elements, which are prototypical in nature and operate at multiple scales simultaneously, in contrast to singular, rarefied architectural solutions. Finally, in part 3 is the virtual launch of a new project called Street Remodel that brings these 8 projects together into one 1 to 30 physical model to reclaim the street as a site for civic possibility and identify new public values for design. So here we go. Crown House is a private mixed-use project that alters and enhances an existing tenement building, introducing a green, pleated and perforated metal screen facade system that shifts scale from commercial to residential use, with augmented openings that create a direct connection to the street. On the roof, a new penthouse is added with a reflective pleated metal crown at the top, which dematerializes into the sky. Conceived during the pandemic at the height of lockdown, a series of spatial clock drawings establish how temporality is tied to spatiality, and a 24-hour clock to reevaluate how the domestic sphere has fundamentally shifted domestic space, occupation, pre-pandemic versus during the pandemic. At the same time, for some, such as essential workers during the pandemic, domestic occupation decreased due to the demands of work. Domestic elements accommodate a new multiplicity of activities. Such improvisational uses challenge preconceived notions and affordances as closets become phone booths and beds become school desks. Tying this concept into the architecture, the project is organized with a vertical concealed thick wall across 3 floors that incorporates a transformable millwork system that can be activated throughout the day and night. The home has the ability to enable multiple activities which would otherwise occur outside, such as leisure, work, and childcare. Thus, the domestic elements are designed flexibly to offer diverse affordances over time. Crown House describes not just the ways in which one considers how duration and time occur and unfold in space, but also the ways in which domestic objects can accommodate the making of rituals, both familiar and new. Looking back to the early 20th century New York Tenement House Act, when fire escapes were retrofitted onto existing buildings for sanitary purposes due to poor ventilation, balcony retrofits propose retrofit strategies to existing buildings and cities to provide not just light and air, but also an expansion of the domestic space to the exterior, an alternative attitude to tabula rasa modernism. If historically pandemics affected architectural typologies, such as the relationship between tuberculosis and the rise of modernism in the early 20th century, the COVID-19 pandemic demands a renewed attention to democratically providing people with access to light and air, not just for the very few who can afford it. Learning from concepts such as the Japanese Engawa, which brings together indoor and outdoor spaces, the project includes 2 prototypes, green escapes and operable thresholds, of what could be many possible retrofits of domestic infrastructures like fire escapes. Green escapes activates the typical fire escape, often the singular access point to the outside world, with mesh panels that produce a layer of privacy for prolonged occupation and a support for inhabitable vertical gardens and climbing ecosystems up the building facade. Both vertical and horizontal surfaces are activated to create both a softer ground and a livelier enclosure. Operable thresholds is a retrofit prototype to existing tenement buildings that explores the addition of screened balconies as operable transitions, allowing user customization depending on desired levels of ventilation, privacy, and sun filtration. The space extends interior domesticity into outdoor chambers, creating depth with light and transparency. Now moving on to part 2. Commissioned by the Bentway Toronto for their Safe and Public Space Design and Research Project, Open Barriers examines the concrete jersey barrier as an omnipresent safety infrastructure as a starting point for a conversation around issues of securitization, accessibility, and infrastructure's value. The concrete jersey barrier, like many everyday urban infrastructures, exists in the background of urban experience, yet they're ubiquitous and repeat, proliferate, and are spread out over the city. The project proposes 2 prototypes to redesign and explore the affordances of the concrete barrier. The Bentway seen here in the background is a linear park located underneath the elevated Gardner Expressway, here with concrete barriers sprawled around the site as urban residue. The first prototype, which is called Playstop, uses the ballast of the barriers to support flexible and easily repeatable and expandable play structures, using arches and horizontal members embedded into the barriers using a scaffolding system. By marking the interior of the barriers as an occupiable zone, this system can afford any number of activities, like tire swings, hammocks, monkey bars, or lights for gatherings. Meanwhile, the arches that are delineated with color can also provide an identifiable threshold condition, both moving inside of the barriers towards the Bentway or from afar when the barriers align. The second prototype, called Pollinator Rest Stop, considers the underside of the Bentway as its site and rethinks the edge condition the barriers create. By considering other urban actors as inhabitants of the site aside from people, it produces an opportunity to integrate the location of the Bentway, here marked with the circle, along a monarch butterfly migration path. It rethinks the sidedness of the Jersey barrier to re-specify an interior and exterior of the object through its profile. A multi-species approach to the city, the prototype creates seasonal habitats for local pollinators throughout the year, as shown here in our planting plan. Introducing a new planter profile to the inside of the barrier, it becomes a rest stop for pollinators and butterflies alike on their migration path. While safety infrastructures like concrete barriers are typically distributed throughout cities as acts of control, these prototypes instead suggest alternative considerations for bodies, species, and urban experience. New Public Hydrant engages with the fire hydrant as a small-scale water infrastructure in New York City to inspire surprising new forms of public interactions surrounding our emergency infrastructure and the city's high-quality drinking water. New York City is one of only 5 major cities in the country with a high enough water quality that does not require filtration, yet bottled water is often purchased instead of drinking from the tap. While fire hydrants may seem like minor infrastructures, like concrete barriers, they repeat and are connected to larger systems and have alternative capacities precisely because they're not buildings and operate in multiple scales. New York City's water comes mostly from the Catskills, Delaware watershed, and it is that same potable tap water that comes to your apartments through the city's water infrastructure that is also connected to the fire hydrants we use for emergency purposes. Developed in discussion with New York City's Department of Environmental Protection to develop their Water on the Go fountain program, the designs are intended to shift perception and raise awareness about drinking water locally. Instead of seeing the hydrant as an emergency infrastructure, New Public Hydrant reveals it as a source of clean drinking water, transforming it with a series of 3 hydrant hacks intended to reduce the use of plastic water bottles and propose a gateway to reimagine everyday experience with water infrastructure. Hydrants for All is a multi-species water fountain. It has 2 facing fountains for humans, 1 low dog bowl, and a bird fountain on the top. Hydrant on Tap is a bottle fill station with a gooseneck faucet and slot machine-like handle. And Hydration Space is an immersive microclimate and sprinkler. It's designed to create a cooling outdoor room during the hot summer with bollard bar seating around it. With both pleasurable and functional ends, New Public Hydrant can be developed with multiple prototypes, such as these low-budget hand washing stations we made last summer, developed for New York City's Open Streets, Cool Streets program in Red Hook with Pioneer Works. Finally, street remodel. Today, there's a renewed value in everyday collective spaces of the city, like the street. As the city adapts to and recovers from the pandemic, transformations of streets are emerging, both formally and informally, as streets become sidewalks and sidewalks become living rooms. After a year of working remotely, we turn to the tactility and physicality of a large-scale 1:30 model for the League Prize exhibition. This virtual launch of Street Remodel collects 8 of our recent projects in order to explore and bring forth latent potentials of everyday infrastructure and daily life to reclaim the civic capacity of the street. Housekeeping of the street reveals it as a space of sharing, one in which community resources and essential services of cities, for example, infrastructure for transportation and water, are endowed with new aesthetic qualities and affordances to produce collective civic spaces. Street Remodel fuses together 8 of our projects into a series of streetscape scenes that simultaneously suggest new parts and new wholes, assembling together multiple scales and interactions. Here, the fusing of Pollinator Rest Stop, Hydrant on Tap, and Hydrants for All populate the street and curbs in front of Crown House and Green Escapes to suggest a familiar yet new urban fabric. Here, a dog takes a sip from Hydrants for All in front of the bodega, while kids play within Open Barriers Play Stop, and in the background, Pollinator Rest Stop extends the habitat of the street tree to the planter microhabitat. Operable thresholds lit from within and green escapes in the foreground suggest an alternative porous identity for the street. By asking monofunctional infrastructures to play a double duty, Street Remodel illustrates how future investment in essential infrastructures could be redirected towards designing social as much as functional utilities, with the capacity to nourish and enrich collective experience. It suggests the street itself as a place of interactivity to stop within, rather than to move through, manifesting new rhythms and rituals of urban experience. Operable thresholds and green escapes sit adjacent to one another here, not at one place, but as a prototypical assemblage that could occur throughout the city. People peer down to the street from inhabitable thickened facades above it towards hydrant on tap at the curb. The extension of the domestic interior space to the street creates adjacent connections with neighbors across multiple floors. By disrupting the behaviors and habits of use affiliated with domestic infrastructure, like fire escapes and balconies, the street can be reanimated in more resource-conscious, interactive, and inclusive ways. This collectivity is one that connects individuals amidst shared experience, a connected individualism. Here showing the inside of the outdoor chamber of operable thresholds, visually connecting to the balcony of Crown House and green escapes. This collectivity also opens up to support multiple species as urban actors, such as plants, birds, and pollinators. As twilight falls in the street corner and lights flip on inside of operable thresholds, green escapes, and Crown House, kids continue to play until the sun goes down and play stop. New public hydrant dots the street curb with kids grabbing a gulp of water and bodega patrons enjoying a cooling immersion in hydration space. As life begins to return to the street, its often overlooked infrastructures are opportunities to imbue the street with pluralistic capacities, not by building anew, but rather by remodeling the familiar. Thank you.
Hello, I am Rodrigo Escandón Cesarman, and I will be presenting on behalf of APRDELESP, which also includes my partner, Ricardo Matias, as well as our other non-entering partner, Guillermo González Ceballos. So first, some acknowledgements. I would like to thank everyone at APRDELESP, starting by its current members, Ofelia Arias, Rodrigo Ortiz, Bernardo Garcia, Leslie Almanza, Diego Sebastián Pulido, and Abraham Valerio, as well as the long list of tens or maybe hundreds of past members and collaborators who have made all this work possible. I would also like to thank everyone at the League, and Rieselbach, Katerina Flaxman, and Anne Carlisle, as well as the Young Architects and Designers Committee, Evie Diamantopoulou, Cyrus Peñarroyo, and Alexander Bonglino, as well as the jury, Tatiana Bilbao, Peggy Deemer, Fritz Haid, and Victor J. Jones. And finally, I would like to congratulate and thank all the other winners, Liz, Lindsay, Ilse, Regina, Diego, Juan Luis, Tei, and Jermaine. And I hope we all get to meet in person sometime soon. So let's get started. APRDELESP is an architecture office based in Mexico City, and more recently also Lisbon and New York. It is a practices research on space and its appropriation. The typology of a traditional architecture practice takes its form in private-facing infrastructure investments, like office space, privileged over public-facing infrastructure investments, like a website or a karaoke bar. And we think this model is obsolete. So as an architecture practice, APRDELESP invests with equal commitment in the public and private, physical and digital infrastructures of the office. And we take the development of these spaces and the exploration of intersections between them as both fundamental to the daily functioning of our office and as a mode of research into the forces of appropriation. So we use this table here to explain these intersections. And so we have private and public-facing infrastructure on the columns and physical and digital infrastructure on the rows. Which generate these four intersections. And so our physical infrastructure consists of two parts. Private one that functions as an office, laboratory, school, archive, and house. And so this is an architectural typology in continuous development that we have temporarily named a mansion studio. And the very first mansion studio, which is where I am right now, and where we all live, is called El Castillo de Chapultepec here in Mexico City. as well as a network of subspaces that we use as a public extension. So after this brief office introduction, this presentation will be centered around these subspaces. And then our digital infrastructure also consists of two parts, a series of software products for organization, communication, and online archiving, as well as APRDELESP.com, a public website that is synchronized with our photo channel, our video channel, and our organization, communication, and archiving programs to collect and publish the information in real time. And we never edit this information specifically for marketing and exhibition purposes. So the way that we think about it is that most architecture offices center themselves around these two intersections. So they care about their private physical infrastructure, which is their physical office. And they also put a lot of work into their public-facing digital infrastructure, which is their website or maybe even their social media. And we invest with equal care we are interested in investing with equal care in the other two intersections. So we care about our internal organization, communication, and archiving softwares, which then become the information that is automatically published on our website, as well as our public-facing physical infrastructures, which are the subspaces that I will get into in a minute. So for the League Prize online installation, we built this website, subespacios.com, which is an online installation dedicated to showcasing and reflecting on our scattered infrastructure. And this website shows every single photo and video that we have taken in our subspaces. And one can open them by clicking on the play or camera emojis in each of these windows. So I'm going to turn on our online radio station. And I am also going to turn on presentation mode on the website using this window here. So to be as connected to the public as possible, welcoming unexpected encounters, conversations, discussions, chaos, messiness, and criticism, our architecture office takes a radical approach. Over the years, along with our private workplace, our office has consisted of a network of self-managed subspaces spread throughout Mexico City. A subspace, an architectural typology in continuous development, conceived by ourselves, by APRDELESP, is a temporary, autonomous, ambiguous, non-hierarchical, one-to-one scale model. So now I would like to walk you through all the subspaces in chronological order. And for anyone who is interested, the architectural drawings are actually available on our office website, APRDELESP.com. So I will quickly show you where to find them, and then I will go back to our online installation. So if you go to our website, APRDELESP.com, and click on the case study section, you will find every single drawing that we have made for every single project that we've made. And we call these case studies, but you can find a lot more information here. So I'll go ahead and start with the subspaces. So in 2012, we opened Café Cena, which is a cafe, and this was our first subspace. We had just finished work on the first project we did together, and this was a restaurant for a client, and we were very frustrated. We were very frustrated with the traditional design process that we had learned in school, where an architect sort of locks themselves up in their private office and they come up with a brilliant finalized design, but then they have to convince their client of building. And so from this frustration, we wrote a manifesto, which you can read on our website, and we opened a cafe. And this cafe consisted of a single long table where everyone sits together. It sits around 30 people. And the food was prepared by a resident chef for a project which changed every year or so. So here you can look at all the projects on the Café Center website. And the space was also open for anyone to organize an event there. So on the website, we have an archive of every flyer of every single event that we did in the space. After that, in 2012, we opened Maconen, which is a resale print shop. And this allowed us to make many collaborations with artists and illustrators, printing sort of artist prints, but it also allowed us to produce and self-publish our own materials. In 2013, we opened CBR, which is 2 convenience stores. At CBR, we sold food, beverages, and publications. And we also had an online platform where any person could sell their own product at a CBR. So it also worked as a kind of a space for showcasing and experimenting with other products as well. In 2013, we opened Muebles Sullivan, which is a cafe and a furniture store. And here we sold cheap metal pieces, which could be produced in any dimensions. A system that we designed based on our office methodology. So we had a very basic rectangular surface and a circular surface, and they could be made in any height, length, and width, made to order, as well as a few other pieces. And these are still available for sale online. And instead of it being an unoccupied showroom, the space also worked as a cafe, and we hosted karaoke nights on Thursdays and Fridays. And similarly to Cafe Cena, any person could organize an event there. And so on the website, we also have this archive of every event that everyone organized while the space was open. In 2014, we opened Los Empalmes. And an empalme, Los Empalmes was an empalme stall in an open-air market, a Mexican tianguis. And so an empalme is a grilled tortilla sandwich, sort of, with a filling made of refried beans. And it's actually more common in the north of Mexico rather than in the center in Mexico City. However, we sold empalmes because the union that organizes the market only allows new vendors who offer a product that is not already being sold in the market, in order to guarantee that there's always a variety of products being sold. And so in this sense, this subspace was an investigation into the traditional Mexican open-air market, the tianguis, and its quote-unquote informal or seemingly disorganized protocols, which are actually often quite sophisticated. In 2015, we started Radio Amigos, which is our online radio station, which we are listening to now. And this is the station that plays in all our subspaces. And you can listen to here in subespacios.com by clicking on this little widget. In 2015, we opened Café Archivo, which is another cafe. And this was part of a temporary installation curated by Mario Ballesteros at Archivo Diseño y Arquitectura. But it ended up becoming the permanent cafe of the museum. So this was a very important experiment for us, because we're very interested in how a temporary intervention can permanently transform an institution. In this case, by testing it on a temporary exhibition, the cafe remained open for the duration for as long as the museum existed. In 2016, we briefly opened Café des Artistes, which was a little cafe that we ran as part of Material Art Fair 2016, which is an art fair that we do the architecture for every year. In 2016, we also made Parque Experimental El Eco. So Parque Experimental El Eco, which we call an experimental park, was a summer pavilion that we made for the 2016 competition at Museo del Eco, which is a competition called Pavillon Eco, which is similar to the PS1 Young Architects program. And for our design, what we did is that we put natural grass on the courtyard and filled it with infrastructure for doing stuff. So we had tables, chairs, speakers, a grill, an umbrella, etc. And we also built a website where people could organize their own events, provoking a kind of alternative program to the official one from the museum. So this is the website where anyone could post an event on the calendar. In 2016, we started Galería La Esperanza, which is an art gallery in the window of a corner store that we made in collaboration with curator Bree Zucker. And so we were fascinated by this condition of the vitrine, which was flat and spatial at the same time and could only be seen from the outside. So the window actually had a depth of 30 centimeters, which made it a three-dimensional space, but it could only be visited by anyone who was walking on the street from the outside. And then finally, in 2018, we opened La Pipi, which we call a lobby bar. And this one is a tiny bar located in the lobby of the building that also houses the private physical infrastructure of the office. And this is the building where we also have our collectively managed archive and where we all live together, and which we call El Castillo de Chapultepec. And so at La Pipi, the only drink for sale is Tecatecans for 25 pesos or around $1. And the only source of music or sound is a jukebox, where one could pick 3 songs for 10 pesos or around $0.50. So simply caring for our subspaces has involved a tremendous amount of housekeeping. We draw, make models, and meet with collaborators in the same spaces where we prepare food, serve neighbors and friends, and clean up their messes. Maintaining our expansive facilities has also led us to transform our design method. Instead of producing fussy, precious drawings as end products, every image we produce is simply the latest iteration of a continuously and frankly easily updated document, not unlike a checklist, a shopping list, or a menu for one of the subspaces. And we have come to understand buildings not only as a product of the labor that goes into designing and constructing them, but also as the work that is put into maintaining them and the communities that use them. So by opening our workspace to the public, our practice has become embedded in the neighborhood. Most of our collaborations and client projects have arisen from these fortuitous encounters. Finally, we believe that architecture firms are in a critical position to use their own offices and other infrastructures as public sites of spatial research and experimentation, even if it requires a bit more housekeeping. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, Tei, Rodrigo, and Ricardo for sharing your work with us. And I'm really excited to have this chance to speak with you this evening. To everyone that's watching, feel free to submit any questions that you have for Tei, Rodrigo, and Ricardo using Zoom's Q&A feature. And while tonight's attendees collect their thoughts, I'd like to pose a question about infrastructure, which is a word that appeared in both of your portfolios and presentations. As architects, we're used to thinking about infrastructure from the top down, maybe because of its bias toward bigness and totalization. But it seems like both of you are approaching it from the opposite point of view. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that arise from doing so?
I could start. Yeah,
Thanks so much, Cyrus. And thanks for the presentation, both of you. I think it's a great question. I mean, I think something I'm interested in is the ways in which infrastructure works is something that's systemic, and it's something that's kind of prototypical and can spread, like a kind of, can kind of take hold and become a small scale intervention that can maybe sort of take place in a number of different contexts or through different dispositions, and that there's not maybe like a singular way in which the infrastructural element can be defined. It can kind of take different different kind of characteristics, let's say. I think in terms of the challenges, I think at least what I've kind of come across is just the actual, some of the work that I've been doing is like very much in the city and sort of like working with agencies in cities. And so the kind of question of the prototype versus the actual physical mobilization of that project into something that's permanent versus temporary. And so when the kind of questions of the permanence begin to get on the table, it safety, liability, all of these concerns that are very much kind of endemic to things like infrastructure and architecture also, honestly. But that's also one of the challenges I found, is that it requires levels of collaboration that are maybe not familiar to how we're trained as architects. And so, for example, with the public hydrant project, we've had to work with like water engineers and plumbers were on our team. And so I think just like how to think about what the team means is something that's not necessarily like the consultant list that you might typically have in a project, but it's maybe a kind of different sort of set of people. And so that's, I think for us at least, that's been something that's been a challenge, and also maybe an opportunity of like learning different languages in a sense, or like different vocabularies of how to even talk about designing for infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that, and you can jump in anytime, Ricardo, but I think that we have, like when I saw Tei's work, I also thought that infrastructure was an idea that kind of connected both. And I think that in our case, we've thought a lot about what the correct word for referring to these things is, and we've kind of settled. I think I really like how you called it home infrastructure, like the the Wi-Fi and the electricity, and we've also called it like everyday infrastructure at times. I think that for us, we've really tried to incorporate into our methodology a kind of flattening of this hierarchy of like architectural objects like windows and floors and doors, and kind of these other these objects that usually fall kind of outside the domain of the often like like masculine and like sort of precious architect. I don't know, like the work of the designer, and so I think but yeah, like if you think about it, of course, that having a speaker is equally like, or can be equally determinant of the things that happen in a space as a wall or a chair or a plate. And I just wanted to add that I think that part of the challenges with these things that are not like walls or roofs is that and to bring it back to the topic of the competition, they require a lot more care and maintenance and housekeeping.
I was thinking too with your with the work you were just presenting in the website, just that question of maintenance and how the sort of afterlife. I mean, I guess maybe the word afterlife, that maybe your projects don't have an afterlife now that I think about it, but just the sort of life of your projects and how they are maintained. Like, how does that, as sort of as like an infrastructural act of care almost, like, is that something that you take on as an office, or is that something that kind of becomes distributed?
No, we totally take it on as an office. And I think it's really, I don't think it comes across super well in the presentation, but it's really transformed the way that we work when we're doing client work, which, none of the projects that we showed are projects for clients. But I think that really thinking of like an architectural drawing, a floor plan or an architectural drawing as like a menu or a checklist from a cafe has really transformed the way we think about these things. Mhm.
Ricardo, I noticed you unmuted. Do you want to add something?
Yeah.
Just thinking about also I would like to add like about the infrastructure. I think that the opportunities you talked about, I think also as the kind of use that people did with the subspaces, like in talking about these opportunities, I think also the infrastructure allowed to some activities to happen. If we didn't have like a projection in Muebles to Live, and for example, we didn't have we wouldn't have like a karaoke night, you know, like some infrastructure in our subspaces gave opportunity to have like some activities and contact with people. I think that talking about opportunity, I think about infrastructure. And then, yeah, I think that.
Yeah, it seems like in both of your practices, like you're thinking about infrastructure in terms of its sociality. I think this is the word maybe Tei you used in your portfolio, but that there's like whether it's fire hydrants or traffic barriers or karaoke machines or kiddie pools, that there's a way in which like those objects bring together people in different ways and sort of compel them to act in different ways. And I guess, Rodrigo, you sort of mentioned this, that like you sort of treat all of that stuff equally. And another question that I had was like, how do you draw the line between infrastructure and other stuff? Like if everything in a way, like the walls, the floors, the fire hydrants, all of that stuff kind of counts as kind of infrastructure.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have developed a methodology to at least be aware of like how much we as an office are like making the decisions for a certain thing, like a certain object. And I think we also are very aware that like in the end, there's going to be some things that are going to be more, more. I don't know if important is the right word, but I think some things are going to be more present or more, in a space. But I think that at least when you're drawing, considering everything as in this flat hierarchy has been important to us. And I think it's like, it's the kind of thing that enables things like, like taking seriously the projector to give an example.
I think also to the first question you had, Cyrus, is that one of the challenges I think about designing these sites of infrastructures or like these sort of sites of sociality is also the misuse. You know, it's like the things that you definitely aren't planning for and that happen, and they become challenges, but then also happy accidents. And so I think kind of like how, I mean, at least for me, like designing, that's at least been a way for me to think about the design of the architectural scale work, is also like how these objects or elements that maybe are of architecture could actually be misused or kind of reappropriated in the way that some of the infrastructural projects have been doing. Ricardo, I feel like that that sort of idea of misuse, or the sort of unexpected ways that people or other species might kind of occupy or inhabit some of these spaces, is something that like we can't plan. Yeah.
And you are more exposed as well to things to happen that you cannot control.
Yeah. Completely more vulnerable.
Right. Like maybe it seems like maybe in both of your practices that it's less about establishing a way to control the social situation, but it's about developing protocols to react in a way, like developing ways to be responsive to the way in which that infrastructure is engaged and used, and to find ways to kind of react or be responsive to those contexts. Yeah. Was there a moment in in each of your practices when you consciously decided that infrastructure was something that you needed to work on?
My MArch thesis was actually on infrastructure. So I think it's somehow been this thread that I kind of unwittingly has been in the back of my head for a long time, I think. And I think maybe it's that it kind of can touch on different scales and different, sort of thinking about the systems that are kind of undergirding the architecture at the same time as designing the scale of like the body. I think that's kind of what's been for me interesting, and like how do you choose or like locate scales for design?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think for us, we mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but for us, the first project that we all did together was a restaurant for a client, and we realized that it's, like it's crazy that even like a, commercial project like a restaurant, like a, a private restaurant is like so open and public facing, and so I think that's like part of the, we kind of felt it was, we had a very complicated, we were trying to do the like heroic architecture, coming up with a project, like pulling it out of the, like the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat, showing it, selling it to the client. And we realized that it was like a crazy missed opportunity to not think of these things, all these public facing things as like a kind of infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think Tei, you mentioned this, that like this working with infrastructure or even kind of working collaboratively is like not, like those aren't things that often are part of an architect's education. But I think in both cases, Tei with the kind of government agencies and Rodrigo and Ricardo with the kind of more the friendships that you've established like in your work, like how, I mean, maybe this is a practical question, but how did you begin to build those relationships? And what are some of the things that you've learned from working with others?
Well, we are using our practice we have a lot of collaborators, also like to relate it to infrastructure, but we also have like a collaborator to design some kind of furniture. We have like, when we have to kind of design something specific for like kind of furniture for a project, we have a collaborator for that. So we are used to have, we don't like to see us like that we can do everything by ourselves. So we kind of use others' knowledge to enrich, to develop our projects. I mean, we do it as naturally like that. We don't see it as something that is not that important as the design, like process. So we like to think it like something that it's embedded in our actual design. I don't know if you want to add something, Rodrigo.
Well, and the other thing is that we, like a lot of the stuff that we've done has emerged from these encounters, like from working from the cafe and being like, cleaning, and also like working and having meetings there. We've met clients that way, and like, yeah, and like it's kind of interesting to meet people through that kind of intense everyday use.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess just in terms of like collaborators, I feel like something I've learned at least is just about persistence. And like, you just have to keep calling. You just kind of have to like keep calling and calling and calling someone who knows someone else, and trying to sort of put teams together and people together that can maybe help unfold a project, like in the city, or I think that there's a lot of people who are like super open-minded about the possibility for how something like street design or something about how city, urban design can unfold. It's just kind of like figuring out what knobs to kind of turn and like which people might be open to that. That's one thing. And then just in terms of like collaborations, I've learned a lot. I have a collaborator named Chris Wobkin, and he's a speculative designer. And I learned a lot from him just about like the one-to-one prototype. Just build it and, test and build, test and build, test and build. And I think, because in architecture school, we're always working a little bit at arm's length. Certainly like we can build models and, details and that kind of thing, but, to be working at the kind of infrastructural scale for example, I think that just became sort of part of a process that I've definitely like tried to integrate more in the way I work. And he's sort of involved in like interaction design and speculative design. So like that kind of scale is really natural. And so that I just learned a lot from that. So I really love working with artists who have totally different approaches from, our training.
Yeah, it seems like there's a really good opportunity to develop like almost like different feedback mechanisms, or like ways of like through the testing and experimentation, like different ways of soliciting and kind of incorporating feedback into the work. I think in both cases, I'm curious, like with the subspaces too, like is there a period where you're kind of like looking at and examining how they're used and kind of constantly sort of maintaining them and revisiting them and thinking about the configuration of objects and how they might produce other kinds of social scenarios?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've like opened and closed many, so I think that every new subspace that we open becomes like a kind of reflection of the things that we've learned from the past ones. And yeah, I think that there's like something interesting that's happened with the subspaces is that when we've done them in within an institution, like I think the relationship between this like temporary thing and the institution is always interesting as well, as like a thing that we kind of think of them as like anti-pop-up, like instead of like a thing that the institution uses to do something for a day and then go back to normal, like we're always thinking like what the like temporary seeming interventions can how can they transform, or like how can they transform an institution and our institution of the office as well.
I was curious, if I could ask a question too about, just as a follow-up, I was wondering for you all, like, are the subspaces, are they kind of, do you think of them as being like disparate, or do you think of them as like a family?
Yeah, I mean, we've called them a network, and they're all very different. There's many cafes, but apart from that, they're all very different. And we do think of them as a family, not in terms of like, I mean, a lot of the operations protocols are the same, and so like the coffee is the same, and we've developed. They didn't end up making it to the website, but we were figuring out if there was a way, maybe sometime in the future, of showing like, because we've also designed all these like operation materials, like checklists and like menus and systems that allow someone to like someone to upload the menu, and it becomes a flyer that we can then sort of automatically publish online, and that's all like a kind of shared infrastructure across the subspaces. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another question that I wanted to ask has to do with representation. There's a nice consistency to the way that each of you represents your work, and it takes time to develop that kind of competence and coherence in one's vision. And I'd love to know more about the role that representation plays in each of your practices with respect to public infrastructure. How did you arrive at these methods? And is there a particular sociality to the drawings and images that you're trying to cultivate?
I mean, in our case, one of the things that one of the kind of habits that we started with our methodology that's I think is different from many design practices is that the first meeting that we have with whoever's involved in a project, be it a client or whatever, the neighbors or whoever's participating, the first meeting we always meet with the survey, and not with a project. And we every time that we make a survey, an architectural survey, we make sure to also sort of catalog all the things that are not typically considered architecture, like walls, windows, roofs, etc. And to very quickly draw them, to have them at hand when we are arranging things in the drawings. So I think that's one of the ways in which our form of representation, and we were very we didn't show drawings on purpose on this presentation, but we do think, I think we we have really tried to make our drawings less precious and to go back to the idea of thinking of the drawing as like a menu of the day or as a checklist for cleaning the bathroom. We see them as like operative drawings that have to be quickly updated because like every week we're going to meet with the people who are involved in the project, and the more we're able to iterate, the better. And so that's why that's why our drawings are all like quick 2D drawings that we don't do, like we never do. We were so tired of the process where you have to like change something in the drawing and then model it again and then make a rendering and then sort of move the line drawing to Illustrator to change the line weights and then like Photoshop the renderings and then put everything together in this. Like we were so like, no one would ever do that for like a checklist for cleaning a cafe. Like it's so absurd that we do that as designers. And so that's why we like all our drawings are straight from AutoCAD. They're 2D drawings, just like lines and hatches. I don't know if you want to add anything, Ricardo, but I think that makes them more social. Like the fact that they're so easy to iterate and that they're so easy to like understand and that a client will see, or anyone involved in a project will see 50 different versions of the project, and they will see each one and they will sort of go through the process with us, rather than us being like, we discovered the correct solution.
Yeah, in a way, like it produces, my guess is that it produces like a new form of accessibility that's like similar to like a hand sketch, like in a way that like maybe the public thinks about what architects do through that form of representation. And it seems like the quickness of the like screenshot of the AutoCAD drawing is like a more contemporary version of that. Or like that's at least my reading of it. Yeah.
Especially with Zoom.
Yeah.
I have a feeling, right? Like, I mean, especially with all the remote work, and then you all are distributed too. I mean, I imagine that also is part of it. I think for me, I guess I kind of try to think about the project and sort of formats of drawings that might be kind of like natural to the project. So I don't sort of go into a project thinking, oh, it's going to be the plan section and like the 0 degree axon or something. I think I try to sort of think through what are forms of representation that are kind of coming out of the project. And so, for example, with the hydrant, like the patent drawing was something that became really something that we actually really wanted to develop as a mode of representation for ourselves, but then also like as a way of thinking about how do you share this, or how do we like develop it to the next level. And I think like the crown house, like the spatial clocks, actually just came out of thinking about program very much being in the house and like literally looking at the clock, being like, oh, still here, still here. And just like, how do you start to actually think about that condition as something that could inform like representation somehow. I think also, I guess, like questions of audience. And so how, like I think some of the drawings we do for clients, but then some of them maybe are more, for ourselves, or maybe more for like an academic audience, or maybe even more for like the public. And so how, even like a before after image that we were working on for the Bentway became something that could be like, oh, this is how the site would kind of shift from A to B. And so that became kind of a document that became really useful. And I mean, it's a little bit like the iteration, like, the sort of moving between. And so we had like a series of, different possibilities for before and after. But that was definitely something that needed to have an audience that was people who would be at that place potentially, versus like a private client or something. So I think there's a couple different factors that get woven into how we try to think about drawing. Yeah.
I mean, this is maybe a good place to pivot to one of the audience questions. So Stephen Loretano asks, or his question is, thanks for sharing this stimulating work. Since each office is pushing existing models of practice in exciting new directions, I'm wondering how this impacts decision-making when it comes to aesthetics. For agency, how important is it that your hacks or interventions differentiate themselves aesthetically from the systems they meet? And for APRDELESP, have the techniques of ongoing care and management you've developed produced any unexpected aesthetic consequences?
Thanks so much for the question, Stephen. I guess for me, I think in terms of the kind of aesthetic differentiation, I guess we try to think about how there's a level of familiarity that's embedded in the intervention. Like it's not about defamiliarization, but it's somehow reconceiving of an object, but maybe it's through a use, or it's sort of through an unexpected form of use or inhabitation that drives the aesthetic somehow. And I think color is like very much something that we sort of work with as something, you know, tied to like legibility, but then also sort of tied to like infrastructural languages of, you know, like like caution tape and, you know, these kinds of things too, that I think that there's sort of a language that's built into that aesthetically that I'm interested in. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's somewhere between those things, and I feel like it is sort of about what I was trying to sort of describe a little bit in the portfolio is just this idea about like a double duty, or something that, you know, maybe looks like something but does something else kind of unexpected, and how that might be a way to mobilize use, but then also you know, reveal it somehow through its aesthetics. So I guess there's not like a specific technique, but it's kind of a process maybe, or like an approach for how we think about it.
Yeah, it seems like with the hydrant hacks in particular, some of the hacks are kind of familiar attachments, but because they're bright blue, like they sort of highlight these like overlooked infrastructures, these things that exist like in the urban realm that we just don't notice. And because they're taking on the kind of the color, like I think they kind of recast them into these like new kinds of objects that we could engage.
Yeah, I think
Ricardo?
Yeah, I think for us, and you can jump in anytime together, but I think for us, there's like, we've thought a lot, and this is more for the representation. We've thought of these like aesthetics of easiness or of ease, and how like how thinking of operations and care and maintenance, and how all of that is so much work and so complicated. How can we like draw in a way that's like easier and faster and like more like, and like, you know, happier and more not to be more productive and be able to like build more things or like grow, but rather to like accommodate more of this like chaos, messiness, discussions, disagreements, etc. And I think there's also like an aesthetic of more thinking of the subspaces themselves and the other stuff that we've designed. I think there's like an aesthetic of like the exuberance of infrastructure, where like, you know, the first cafe that we showed, it's a long table that sits 30 people, and there's a power outlet for each person underneath the table. And so there's like these little things that are like, we thought of it as like we've thought about it as like exuberant infrastructure. Like what things would be enabled if like there was a water faucet in each room of your house, or like a water fountain in each fire hydrant. But there's like, I think there's an aesthetic, there's like a kind of experiential aesthetic of the luxury of like equipment.
And I think that with seems like also in your presentation on the website too, like the graphic design of flyers and like all of the other stuff that comes with the events themselves also feels like it's informing the way that you're at least like formatting your work or even approaching the drawings. But it feels like that that's also, I think, maybe part of the representation or the representational sensibility of your work too, that it like all kind of like the event sort of like feeds back into the work in some way.
And we worked. Sorry, no, we worked a lot to have like with the flyers, for example. We've worked a lot in like automating these things so that we can like quickly like throw an image and the text and like or like you know, for the subspaces, we have these, like for the cafe, for Cafe Cena, the cafe, we had this form where anyone could fill in their information to organize an event. We received it in our like internal database, and then we like automatically converted it. We picked an image and quickly converted it into a flyer. And I think that's like, there's many aesthetic choices that come from that logic. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, this makes me think of another question, which has to do with like temporality, which I think is also something that I kind of noticed in both of your practices. And just I admire the fact, I admire your ability to handle all of the layered temporalities of the urban environment, whether it's the event or all of the changes that happen with kind of large scale urban infrastructure, and how you allow transformation to motivate your design process. But I also assume that like requires a lot of like effort and care on your part. And so I'm wondering, like, what protocols do you rely on to manage change over time? Because it feels like that's something that maybe architects are not as cognizant of, I think, maybe in the design process, like how to sort of be mindful of like the kind of larger lifespan of a project as opposed to like the start and end. So I'm wondering, like, yeah, what protocols do you rely on to manage that change over time?
I guess for me, I mean, I'm really curious to hear what you all think about in your work. Yeah, I mean, I think the middle is really interesting. Like, I think just like the idea of the middle, and that it's not, you know, somehow that it's not about the design of the sort of top-down end product, but there's something about that middle zone that allows for a possibility for kind of flexibility in an end, let's say. And so like, yeah, I mean, I think just how you begin to think about like that middle space that's more immediate or like a kind of near future even, versus like, you know, the 80-year, 100-year, you know, crisis moment, that there's something about that immediacy, I think. And so I guess what I definitely sort of just think about like periods and possibilities of like the middle and like kind of really thick middle, even like of a project,
Yeah.
Rather than just being like, oh, this is the brief, here's the product, like just kind of trying to think through what that sort of thick, fuzzy, kind of full of friction middle is, that's maybe messy, to think through how to maybe put together possibilities for that, you know, farther future.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think that the temporality, I think that, yeah, as architects, we tend to like think of the like future, and it's very hard for us to like to be aware of like the maintenance that's required in the projects that we make, and I think that awareness opens a lot of possibilities. I guess it's like that awareness of the middle, where like, you know, rather than being like, okay, we're just going to make a, you know, brick wall that just has to be cleaned every however many weeks. If rather than that, you also think of like, like things like the, you know, the planter that has to be cared for, and that's going to be connected to like a living thing that, you know, may or may not require some care. And I think that like being very aware of that has been a way of like thinking of these transformations.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is an opportunity to maybe bring in one of the questions from the audience, from Harish. The notion of producing public-oriented architecture seems to run in both of your works. How does the notion of community input factor into your design processes? Where do you see the limits of your own architectural agency, self-imposed or otherwise?
I mean, I can start. I think for the subspaces, we have struggled a lot with like this idea of like like, because we are very aware that our subspaces are not public. Like they're privately owned, you know, public facing spaces, but they're not public. But maybe, you know, we had a subspace, and when we won the pavilion, that's a public museum. It's a museum owned by the National University, so it's a public museum. But we've never actually had the opportunity of having an actual subspace in an actual public space. And so I think that's like something that we, right, like Harish in the Q&A calls in public oriented, which I think is like accurate for the subspaces. And we're also very skeptical of a lot of these. You know, we've seen some, you know, we've seen some of these processes that are done for public projects where, you know, an architecture office or a government agency will try to incorporate the public through these sort of participatory design methods. And, you know, I don't know if it's like, it probably has to do with the institutional arrangements and the institutional culture of Mexico. But we're very skeptical of these processes because we think that many times it's like, you know, the process of participation becomes a way of like setting the parameters for, or you know, justifying publicly a project for which the decisions are already taken or will be taken, you know, not in the public sphere. So this is all to say that we think that one of the ways of like incorporating the community and like, you know, allowing them to have a say and to participate and to like be part of these projects is in the everyday. And so we've done things more like, you know, in the convenience stores, we had this like forum where anyone could sell their product through the convenience store. And it became a kind of experiment in like, what happens if we allow any product to be sold, even if it's only as an experiment, or what happens if anyone in both the furniture shop and the cafe, anyone could organize an event. So, you know, like maybe at that temporary scale, there's an openness that being very aware of the fact that, you know, we didn't sit with the neighbors to design the cafe. There's an openness there.
Yeah, I think I sort of feel like for me it goes both ways. So on the one hand, you know, I feel like public input or like community input is really important because you know, just I think just getting the sense of like what the breadth of a need is, and you know, we also like workshop our prototypes too. So like some, you know, Parks Department versus DEP, you know, kind of like talking too about like, there are kids who are interns who we also kind of interviewed about like, oh, what would you want this, you know, what would you want this to look like, for example? And you get great ideas. You know, you can get really great ideas. At the same time, you know, and in that sense, I think the prototype, like the kind of way of working prototypically, I think is really useful because you can kind of test through the prototype and incorporate certain ideas in a kind of strategic manner. I think at the same time, I feel like with community input, like it's also like who shows up at the meetings, who has time to go to the meetings, who's not talking, you know, like who's, you know, and I think that's like a serious issue. And so I think it's also the role of the designer or the architect or, you know, whoever is kind of seeing the project through is to, you know, synthesize what, you know, the community input is, but I mean, who's not talking, like who's not there, what's not there in a way. And so I think kind of being tasked to synthesize and then also being tasked to like ask the bigger kind of conceptual questions and also like, you know, what's missing, I think in these kinds of questions too, because I feel like sometimes it gets down to like, I don't like the handle. You know, it's like, you know, I don't like the way the handle goes, or, you know, sometimes it gets down to that detail, but it's like, well, actually maybe this like, you know, huge representations aren't present to be talked about. So, you know, so I think that I feel like there's a kind of push and pull with that kind of input and that kind of, you know, threading in that kind of process that, you know, I think to be close to it, but then also to be critical of the feedback that you're getting and like, you know, who again, like who the audience is and like who, who can be there, and who is
Right.
it for?
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to say. I think that what I meant to say was not that incorporating the community is not important. What I'm saying is that it's very
totally
difficult.
Yeah, it
and
is.
we also haven't done a true public project. I think that's like an insane challenge, and it's crazy how and it seemed, from looking at like the way other people have done it, it seems like everything that you try to do, it's so hard. Like everything feels like
you can't get it right. You can't please
like
everyone.
you're gonna screw it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe this is a good place to segue into the last question before we wrap up tonight. And this is from a representative from Lindsay May's office who's using their account. So this question is as follows. It's pretty apparent in both presentations that the firm's physical context played a big role in the ideas developed and the questions asked. For example, Tei's street remodel project responds directly to archetypes typical to New York, and APRDELESP's subspaces are so intimately entwined with the functions and users of those particular spaces. I wonder how both parties can understand their explorations and interventions within the context of another site or city. Moreover, how can architects practicing in different cities take some of the lessons learned in these presentations and apply them or understand them in their own physical context?
I think for me, it's like really I think growing up in New York, being from New York, I think there's like a very specific tie to a place and like how things kind of work and function that I wouldn't necessarily know how to transport some of the work. I just frankly, I think how a fire escape works in different countries and different cities, it's so different. To that end though, like we definitely did a lot of work like looking at different ways in which it worked, the hydrant or something, or like the water fountain works in different cities and contexts. And so kind of trying to think about how to bring some of that research back. So maybe there's like a reverse process for how I work, is kind of bringing some of that information back in. But I think it would require a lot of, for me at least, in how I think about it, I think it would require like a lot of I don't think it's like a transportable design, I guess, necessarily. But yeah, I'm curious about you all, because also just thinking about how you're dispersed in different cities and how you think about that with your work in Mexico City.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts, Ricardo? Because I think we...
No, go.
Because I think we've been dispersed, but it's also work that's very grounded in this community, and yeah, I don't know. I think that we've never actually done a project outside Mexico City. We're working on our very first few projects that are not here, so it's difficult to imagine how these would be, how these, I think that there's like, there are definitely some things that we see here that we recognize as unique. I think there's like an openness and a richness to like, what to the sort of the illegality of like, or the like unregulated aspects of Mexico City, and I really, we are very careful to not romanticize that, because we think it's like, that it obviously has a downside of violence and and like sort of weak institutions. But I think that that's like it has allowed us to like maneuver in a way that I think would be very different in a city like New York. Like opening a cafe in New York is probably incredibly difficult. Or even convincing a museum to allow you to run a cafe as part of your exhibition is probably more difficult there than here. And it has to do with that. I think for me, I think that if I had to summarize it in one aspect, it's like weakness of institutions, which, can be taken advantage of. It's ultimately has a lot of problems.
But yeah, but maybe there's a kind of awareness of that I think your practice is like trying to kind of cultivate, like in all of these subspaces, like a kind of hyper awareness of that could direct it towards like a public good or a kind of public service, as opposed to something that's maybe more like taking advantage of it in a different way. Yeah. Well, great. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to all three of you tonight. I'm going to let Anne take over, but yeah, it's been really great to have this opportunity, and hopefully we can meet up in person sometime soon. Congratulations again.
Yeah, I think
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
it was totally fascinating and really interesting to think about the work on an infrastructure and urban scale. And we truly appreciate both of your presentations and hope that you will all come back next week for the final set of lectures that take things again in a very different direction. And I'm thinking that we really need to get everybody on screen sometime for a lunchtime conversation, as opposed to segmenting it all, because it's just so interesting, I think, for me and for the jury to get a chance to hear you dialogue with each other about the work the way we were talking about it. So thank you everyone for joining us and for letting us share in this conversation, and we'll see you next week.